Minette Norman, welcome to Listening with Leaders. You are a former tech exec. You had huge responsibilities for a while, and then you got smart and got out and became a leadership consultant. And your website now is minettenorman.com. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you because we have a lot in common and share a lot of common interests. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it too, Doug.
Let's start, Minette, with a little bit about your backstory. I think you got into tech early on, and there weren't a lot of women in tech in those days. And I imagine there were some stories to tell.
I did get involved quite early on. I didn't expect to get into tech. My background was actually in the liberal arts, but I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I ended up getting my start at Adobe in 1989. So this is early Silicon Valley days.
Wow.
And my first job, I was a technical writer and I wrote the Photoshop 1.0 tutorial. So
Oh,
that's, it's really like the pioneering days of
so
software.
were you in Utah where Adobe was founded, or were
No,
you
no, it
Silicon
was
Valley?
Mountain View,
No.
California at the
Okay.
time. That was their
Okay.
headquarters.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny that you say there were not many women in tech. True. But honestly, I don't think that the percentages were that different in 1989, 90 than they are today.
Oh, wow.
It's
Okay.
certainly in engineering.
Right. Of course.
It was always a small percentage.
So yeah, I saw that you graduated in Tufts. Is that right?
That's right. I went to Tufts and I studied drama and French and wanted to be an actor and realized just how hard that was and got into used my French degree for a while. I was in New York City. I worked for the French Trade Commission when they were introducing computers for the first time. And that's when
Wow.
I actually realized, oh, I'm quick study. I like this. I'm good at helping people understand it. That was what led me to Silicon Valley and to technical writing because I was good at taking the technical and making it simple and accessible. And that's what
Wow.
good technical writers do.
You rose through the ranks in Adobe, right? You were there for quite a while.
No, it wasn't
Oh.
Adobe where I stayed. So I was Adobe for maybe 2, 3 years. I worked
Okay.
on Photoshop and Illustrator, and then I decided I was really young, and I was like, oh, what else can I do? And so I hopped around to 5 different tech
Wow.
companies in 10 years. So Adobe, EFI, a startup that didn't make it called Chaos Tools. Then I went to Symantec. Then in 1999, I went to Autodesk, and that's the one
Oh,
you're
that was
thinking
at
of. Because I
Autodesk. Wow.
ended up staying at Autodesk for 20 years when I thought, oh, I'll stay here a couple of years. But I ended up there rising through the ranks. So starting as an individual contributor, getting into management, and then taking on bigger and bigger roles until my final role, which I had for about 5 years. I was VP of engineering with about 25, well, I guess I had 1,000 people on my org chart and another 2,500 that I had to work with and influence. So that was that big job you're
That's
referring.
amazing. And not the traditional track, right? Coming from a
Not
liberal
at all.
degree and learning by doing, not the MBA from Stanford or Berkeley or whatever. And good for you. So I'm curious. Let's talk about what you did that for 20 years. And then when did you move into the business that you're in now, basically writing and consulting and speaking?
I left the industry in late 2019 and I started my business right during the pandemic
Yeah.
shutdown in
Mhm.
2020. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I just want to touch on what you said, totally non-traditional background for leading engineering, but
That's right.
having been in engineering before I got that role for about 25 years. So even though I wasn't coding, I was
Mhm.
working with engineers. I was pretty technical without being hands-on coding. And I think what got me there was that I had led other departments in the company and I had led them through big changes. So
Um,
at one point, I took on localization, which is getting everything ready for international markets. And I had to completely rethink how that department operated and how we worked with others in the company. And that's where I got more well known within the company. That's where the executives got to see me in action.
mhm.
And that's why I had the opportunity to even apply to be VP of engineering.
Wow. That sounds like it was a big job.
It was a big job. And I know we had a little conversation before we started recording, but one thing that I will say about that job. So when I took the job, the SVP who put me in the position, and he actually made me do a 90-day trial to see if I was a fit
Mhm.
and had to win over all the engineering leaders in the company who at the time were all men. So
Right.
basically winning over the engineers. I got the job. But what he told me is at this point, we were a 30-year-old company. We were going from desktop software to cloud-based computing. We needed to modernize our tech stack and how we worked. And it was the how we worked that I got particularly interested in because I had great people who could handle the technology challenges. They all were in my organization. They could work with the engineering leaders. What I was trying to do was change the culture and change the behavior and change how people work together because there was almost no collaboration.
Wow.
And we were reinventing the wheel all over the company. It was like,
So it
why
sounds
can't we actually collaborate?
it sounds like I don't know, have you studied Ronald Heifetz's work, Adaptive Leadership? Have you ever run
I
across
have
it?
not.
Okay. It sounds like you had an adaptive challenge, leadership challenge, and you probably just organically applied adaptive leadership principles. So the difference between an adaptive challenge and a technical challenge is the technical challenge is you give an engineer a problem and say, here, you got to code this and figure it out. And that's a technical challenge. They know how to do it. They figure it out, and it's really easy. An adaptive challenge is what you're describing, where you've got conflicting values and beliefs, you've got lack of collaboration, you've got people siloed, and these are much deeper behavioral problems that require a completely different kind of leadership than what
Yeah.
you would get from for example, an engineering lead who would be just managing coders, for example. And that's a very different problem to solve than what you described. How'd you go about figuring it out and solving the problem?
It was multi-step and it was multi-year. Obviously, it's not
Right.
something you change a culture easily, a 30-year-old culture. First, it was like identifying the problems, getting to know. For me, it's always about the people. It's about who is leading these efforts. So for me, it was getting to know all the engineering leaders in the company. They had different product groups that they were leading. And so I created this council basically of all the engineering leaders. We got together, we got to know each other, we got to know what is this group known for? What are we really good at? Because I think once people understand, oh, there are pockets of expertise that maybe I could tap into and vice versa. And then we started thinking about how can we work together? How can we get everything, for example, into a common code repository? How might we contribute to one another's code instead of reinventing the wheel? And it took time, but it was really about getting to know the leaders, letting them get to know each other, establishing trust, establishing an environment where we could speak the truth, psychological safety, and not just posture and try to maintain our reputations, but
Right.
actually say, we're dealing with a challenge here. Is there someone who could perhaps help us with that?
So I would guess that it was your responsibility to create the psychologically safe environment where that could happen. How do you go about doing that, especially with male engineers who are probably highly skeptical of this sort of thing?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, what I would say is that there were the skeptics, but there were also the people. And in fact, when I did that 90-day trial, people said to me, we need change. We can't just keep doing things the way we always have. So there was some receptivity to, we need to do something differently, but we aren't quite sure what that is or how it all works. So I think there was an openness. And in fact, when I was hired, the SVP said basically, we need someone who can lead change. So there was an acknowledgement that it's not status quo. And then I think it was just for me, establishing psychological safety is just showing up and saying, look, not one of us, including me, has all the answers. That's the first place. Here I was, I had a huge responsibility, and I did not pretend to come in with directives and say, we must do this, we must do this. We have suggestions about what we need to do. I don't know how to do it, and I can't do it alone. And so asking for help, asking for people to really tell the truth, and it takes time. It's not like people love to say, this is a safe environment, say anything. People don't believe that
That's
until they
right.
have evidence that
That's
it
right.
really is safe and there will be no retribution. There will be no
That's
negative
right.
ramifications if I say, this is ridiculous. I can't do it. I need
That's
some
right.
help. Or ask for help, ask for a question, challenge someone else. We have to see that it works in order to believe it. So that's what I
Right.
just kept plugging away at, is having these conversations and making sure no one was embarrassed or marginalized or interrupted, or and that everyone had a chance to speak. I do that a lot, is I make sure there's turn taking, because I want to hear all the voices and I want to acknowledge that everyone has something important to contribute. And there were people who never spoke in those meetings until I said, you know what, I really want to hear from you, Tony
Right.
or Ashok or whoever these
Mhm.
quiet people are. And then gradually over time, they started to contribute.
You get your most wisdom from your introverts.
You told that was the biggest lesson I learned.
I know that.
I feel really lucky that I learned that early in my management
Mhm.
career. I had someone incredibly introverted and just a genius. And I started to realize, oh, it's going to take a totally different style of interaction, of
Right.
leadership to bring out his wisdom and his genius and let him contribute.
Yeah, that I think I think that's the sign of really great leadership. It's recognizing that your introverts are your power structure, and
Yeah.
they don't unless you help them talk, they're not going to talk. And then the extroverts, the ones who can't shut up and got love to hear themselves talk, you got to shut them down
Exactly.
nicely, but
Exactly.
you got to do it gracefully. But you really got to create space for people to feel comfortable expressing themselves and make sure that other people in the room are not going to put them down, saying that's the stupidest, dumbass thing I've ever heard. That has to stop. Period.
Exactly. And some of it is also very subtle. So, yeah, there's the person who says, that's just stupid. That's never going to work.
Right.
There's also, and the stuff that I experienced was often more what you might call a microaggression, but those are equal. I hate the word the term micro because they're just as damaging of someone.
Right.
You say something and someone just rolls their eyes
Exactly.
or just does that sit back in the chair, ugh, and you're like, oh, they do not want to hear what I have to say. And I think
Right.
that's in some ways more insidious than someone saying that's ridiculous because they don't even have the honesty to say, I totally
Right.
disagree with you.
So the way I control that is I have ground rules, group ground
Yep.
rules.
Yep.
And one of the ground rules is we're going to be respectful. Tone of voice, words we choose, and body language.
Body
It's
language. Yep.
going to be respectful to everybody. And then when people violate it, which they always do, then it's a question of, so what's your commitment to ground rule number 5 being respectful to everybody right now? So you never really
Yeah.
call it out. What you do is ask for a recommitment.
I love that. I love
And
that.
that's the methodology that I use in those situations. So since 2019, you're in your own business. What kind of work are you doing today?
I am primarily doing talks and workshops with
Okay.
organizations on inclusive leadership, inclusive meetings. So it's like what you're talking about, the ground
Right.
rules, and psychological safety. And sometimes I do longer engagements with organizations, like where I'll spend a year with an organization who
Mhm.
really wants to go deep. But I would say that the majority of my work is keynotes and workshops, which I
Mhm.
love to do. I love to spark
Yeah.
some new
In-
behavior and thought.
Inclusion is a dirty word right now, I guess.
Oh, what a week. We're recording us the week that the federal government has banned the DEI
That's
program
right.
and ended the anti-discrimination
And
practices. So
we're gonna watch that all blow up. It's beyond stupid, and it's gonna blow up, and then we'll come back and pick up the pieces and start over again.
I know. And I think that what's really interesting is you see the organizations that are recommitting to DEI. There's an article I read about that this week, whether it's Costco or Microsoft or
Mhm.
Apple, et cetera. The list is long. It was funny the day that the announcement came out, I think that was Tuesday, Wednesday, about shutting down these programs. I had a 7 a.m. workshop on inclusive leadership for a tech company that just keeps recommitting to this. And every time they bring on new leaders, they say, let's put them through this inclusive leadership training. So I agree. I think there's going to be rebranding, but the ability to work together as human beings, you can call it what you want, but it is not going away.
That's right. And our population is going to be, as much as some people in this country would like to go back to Northern Europeans as the dominant people in the country, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, look
And
at the population, right?
exactly. And so we better learn how to get along with each other and listen. I call it listening others into existence. So how do you
Yes,
go about listening to people in a way that they feel validated and heard? And that to me is the kind of the secret sauce of everything. Um,
I
yeah,
agree with you.
we're gonna see some, I don't know. We're here in California. I think we're protected.
Maybe.
We have a big desert to the east of us and a big ocean to the west of us. Who can bother us, right?
I know. I know. It's funny. I wrote this book that came out in 2023, which is entitled The Boldly Inclusive Leader. And in some ways, I later regretted the title because I think it puts itself into that DEI niche. But
Mhm.
really, what it is, it's a leadership book. It's a book about modern leadership. How do you lead teams in ways that everyone can be successful and everyone can do their best work? And,
Right,
it's eating away at me that
right.
people now have said, oh, it's DEI. Let's not touch that.
Exactly. It reminds me, my second book was which I co-authored with my colleague John Bogart, called "Sex, Politics, and Religion at the Office: The New Competitive Advantage." This is back in 2007, 2008.
Oh, wow.
We were writing about this, and the book never went anywhere. But it's it's a critical problem, and if leaders don't know how to deal with diversity, all you've got is chaos and conflict.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. And I also think that one of the things that's happened in recent years is that when we talk about diversity, people have thought about it very narrowly, as we're talking about race, maybe
Mhm.
gender, but we're talking about race and maybe we're talking about gender. But the vast diversity of human beings, and we forget all the other aspects of diversity. I mean, like, what are we trying to shut down here?
Exactly.
Diversity of thought?
I know. It's mind-boggling. And we'll just have to wait and see how it all shakes out.
Yeah. And I'm not backing down, by the way. I'm not
No, no,
running
no. And
away. We can't.
I think we got 2 years of chaos, and then the Republicans get booted out of Congress, and then we'll be at a stalemate for 2 years, and then we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah.
But 2 years is going to be pretty chaotic. So I'm curious about